Before we begin, listen close. If you love dark, forbidden stories that pull you into another world, welcome to Canon of Darkness. Make sure you subscribe, like this video, share it, and drop a comment telling us which city in the USA you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let me tell you how it all began. The auction yard was already losing its voice when Eleanor Hale raised her hand. Dust hung thick in the late afternoon air, and the crowd, loud just moments before, fell into a sudden, uneasy hush. Men shifted their boots, women leaned closer. No one expected a widow dressed in black mourning silk to make a move, especially not now, and definitely not for him. The man on the platform lifted his head at the sound of her bid. His face looked carved from struggle itself, sharp jaw, bruised knuckles, skin marked by years of survival. Chains hung loose around his wrists, but nothing about him looked owned. His eyes were the worst part, dark, alert, untamed. The kind of eyes that didn't beg, they warned. The auctioneer hesitated. Men like Caleb Rourke were not bought for farm labor. Everyone there knew that. Strong men were useful. Dangerous men were profitable for the wrong reasons. And widows like Eleanor Hale were not supposed to want either. 120, she said calmly. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Someone scoffed. Someone else whispered that grief had finally broken her mind. Eleanor didn't react. She didn't blink. Her gaze never left the man staring back at her like she'd just lit a match too close to dry powder. Caleb's eyes narrowed, not with gratitude, but confusion, maybe even anger, as if he was trying to understand why she would choose him. The final call came fast. The gavel struck. Sold. Chains were tightened. Guards moved in. But even restrained, Caleb looked like a man who could tear a wall apart if he decided it was time. The guards kept their distance. The men in the yard looked away. The women didn't. Eleanor's chest tightened, not because of fear, and not because of his appearance, though she noticed that too, but because of how exposed she felt under his stare, like he could see through the polite widow act, like he knew loneliness when he saw it. Hours later, when he was brought to her carriage, Caleb refused to look at her. "You shouldn't have bought me," he said, voice low, rough as gravel. Eleanor swallowed. "Why?" He finally lifted his head. "Because I'm not the kind of man a woman like you survives." Her pulse jumped. That wasn't a warning. It was a promise. "Look at me," she said. He didn't until she stepped closer than was proper, closer than was safe. When their eyes met, the air between them changed. Heat, defiance, something unspoken and dangerous, simmering just beneath the surface. Back at the Hale estate, whispers followed them through the halls. Eleanor's sister-in-law, Margaret Hale, stormed toward her, fury blazing. "That man does not belong here," Margaret hissed. "What have you done?" Eleanor brushed past her. "Exactly what I intended." Caleb heard it. Later, standing at the door to his assigned quarters, Eleanor paused. "You're safe here," she said quietly. "No one will hurt you." Caleb frowned. "Why? What do you want from me?" She hesitated, then turned away. "You'll understand, in time." As she left, Caleb did something reckless. He caught her wrist.
Their eyes locked. The house suddenly felt too small. "Careful," she whispered. "Someone might see." His voice dropped. "Maybe that's the point." And with that, the storm had begun. Because Eleanor Hale didn't just buy a man that day. She awakened something neither of them could control, and someone in that house was already watching. The storm arrived after midnight. Rain slammed against the windows of the Hale estate, hard enough to make the old house groan like it was alive and uneasy. Wind rushed through the trees, rattling branches against the walls, whispering secrets no one wanted spoken aloud. Caleb Rourke lay awake on the narrow bed Eleanor had given him. He wasn't used to silence that thick, or rooms that didn't smell like sweat, blood, and fear. The mattress was too soft, the ceiling beams too clean, but comfort wasn't what kept his eyes open. It was her voice, her hand on his wrist, the way she hadn't pulled away. He replayed it over and over, the heat of her skin, the hitch in her breath when he touched her. He hadn't planned it. Hell, he hadn't even wanted to. But something in her eyes, something lonely and sharp, had pulled it out of him like instinct. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Caleb sat up instantly, muscles tightening, senses alert. He reached for the edge of the bed, ready for trouble. The door creaked open slowly. It was Eleanor. She stood there in a dark robe, hair loose around her shoulders, a small lantern shaking slightly in her hand. She looked nothing like the composed widow from the auction yard. This version of her looked restless, haunted, awake in all the wrong ways. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't sleep." Caleb stood. "You shouldn't be here." Widows didn't visit men like him. Not at night, not alone, not unless they were ready to burn everything down. "I know," she said, "but my thoughts wouldn't stop." She closed the door behind her. Thunder cracked, close enough to shake the floor. The lantern light flickered across her face, revealing fear tangled with something far more dangerous, want. "What do you need from me?" he asked quietly. Eleanor hesitated. "That's just it," she said. "I don't know." She stepped closer, one step, then another, each one heavy with consequences. When she reached him, she lifted her hand toward his face, but stopped inches away, trembling. "I don't want to make a mistake," she whispered. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You already did." Her eyes flicked up. "Buying you?" "Yes." His voice dropped lower. "And coming here." Thunder rolled again, long and angry. Eleanor didn't pull away. Instead, she looked at him like she was standing on the edge of something she'd already decided to jump into. "Tell me to leave," she said. He couldn't. She moved even closer, close enough that he could feel her warmth, smell rain on her skin. Her fingers brushed his chest, barely there, but it was enough to make his breath hitch. "I don't feel alive around anyone else," she said softly. That was when something inside him snapped. Caleb reached up and cupped her face, slow and deliberate, like he was giving her one last chance to stop him. Eleanor gasped, leaning into his touch like she'd been starving for it. And then, a sharp knock hit the door. "Eleanor?" came Margaret's voice from the hall. "Are you awake?" The door handle rattled. Caleb's heart slammed against his ribs. Eleanor pressed a finger to her lips, panic tightening her features. She rushed to the door, smoothing her robe, forcing calm into her voice. "I'm awake," she called. "The storm disturbed me." "Why are you in this part of the house?" Margaret asked sharply. Eleanor froze. "I thought I heard a window loose," she said. "I was checking." Silence stretched, dangerous, heavy. Finally, footsteps moved away. Eleanor sagged against the door, breath shaking. Caleb stepped close behind her, voice low. "You shouldn't risk yourself for me." She turned slowly. "Maybe that's the problem," she said. "I don't feel like it's a risk." They stood there, inches apart. Caleb's heart slammed against his ribs.
Eleanor pressed a finger to her lips, panic tightening her features. She rushed to the door, smoothing her robe, forcing calm into her voice. "I'm awake," she called. "The storm disturbed me." "Why are you in this part of the house?" Margaret asked sharply. Eleanor froze. "I thought I heard a window loose," she said. "I was checking." Silence stretched, dangerous, heavy. Finally, footsteps moved away. Eleanor sagged against the door, breath shaking. Caleb stepped close behind her, voice low. "You shouldn't risk yourself for me." She turned slowly. "Maybe that's the problem," she said. "I don't feel like it's a risk." They stood there, inches apart, the storm still raging outside, but something far worse was building inside the house. Because someone had almost caught them, and next time they might not be so lucky. Eleanor believed the danger was over, but by morning, suspicion would spread through the estate, and the woman who truly controlled the house was already watching Caleb very, very closely. Morning came quietly, but nothing about it felt peaceful. The storm had passed, leaving the Hale estate wrapped in a damp, uneasy silence. Mist clung to the ground like it didn't want to let go, and the air smelled of wet earth and trouble waiting to surface. Caleb was already awake. He stood in the stable yard before dawn, repairing a broken beam with steady hands, trying to keep his thoughts where they belonged, on work, on survival, on staying invisible. But his mind betrayed him. Eleanor's face kept slipping back in, her voice, the way she'd almost stayed. He told himself it wouldn't happen again. That lie lasted exactly 5 minutes. "You're up early." The voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Caleb turned slowly.
Margaret Hale stood near the fence, arms folded, eyes sharp and calculating. She wasn't dressed for the morning chill, and that alone told him this wasn't coincidence. She'd been watching, waiting. "You work fast," she continued, "not like the others." Caleb gave a small nod and went back to the beam. "I do what I'm told." Margaret stepped closer, too close. "Men like you bring complications," she said, "especially for women like Eleanor." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean." She smiled thinly. "You will." With that, she turned and walked away, skirts swishing with quiet authority. Caleb watched her go, a cold weight settling in his chest. He'd survived worse threats than words, but words in this house carried power. Later that morning, Eleanor found him near the stables. She approached carefully, glancing around before speaking. "She questioned me." Caleb didn't look up. "I know." "She told me to keep my distance from you." His hands paused. "Then you should." Eleanor stepped closer anyway. "Is that what you want?" He finally faced her. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she'd barely slept. "I want you safe," he said, "and I'm not that." Her voice dropped. "You don't get to decide what I can survive." Before he could answer, a shadow fell across them. Barnett Crane, the overseer, stood at the edge of the yard, watching with a look that lingered too long. His presence sucked the air out of the space between them. "Widow Hale," he said smoothly, "Margaret has a word." Eleanor's stomach twisted, but she nodded. "Of course." As she walked away, she didn't look back. She couldn't. Caleb watched her disappear toward the house, knowing instinctively that something had shifted. The balance was gone. Inside the drawing room, Margaret wasted no time. "You're not hiding it well," she said, setting down her teacup. "You're concerned for him." Eleanor straightened. "He's under my care."
"And far too close for comfort," Margaret replied. "People talk, and when they talk, reputations die." Eleanor felt heat rise in her chest, not fear, but resolve. "I won't send him away." Margaret's eyes hardened. "Then you'll force my hand." Outside, Caleb felt it before he heard it, a shift in the air. Workers whispered. Looks followed him. Suspicion spread like rot. By evening, Eleanor found him again, this time by the old orchard at the edge of the property. "They're watching us," she whispered. "I know," he said. She stepped closer, voice shaking. "I don't want to pretend anymore." Caleb closed his eyes. "That's what will get us destroyed." "Or free," she said. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw it, the choice she was already making. Somewhere in the house a door slammed, and both of them knew the night ahead would not be kind. Eleanor believed she still had control, but the overseer had seen enough, and by nightfall he would decide exactly how much her secret was worth. Night fell heavier than usual over the Hale estate. Lanterns flickered along the paths, casting long, warped shadows that stretched like reaching fingers. The house was alive with quiet tension, doors closing too softly, voices stopping when footsteps passed. Secrets had a way of changing how walls listened. Caleb felt it in his bones. He finished his work later than normal, hands sore, shoulders tight, eyes constantly scanning. The overseer, Barnett Crane, hadn't spoken to him again, but that silence was worse than shouting. Men like Barnett never stayed quiet unless they were planning something. Caleb was washing his hands at the pump when Eleanor appeared at the edge of the yard. She didn't call out. She never did anymore. "You shouldn't be here," he said before she spoke.
"I needed to see you," she replied. Her voice was calm, but her eyes weren't. They were burning with a mix of fear and defiance. "Margaret knows." Caleb straightened slowly. "How much?" "Enough," she said. "She didn't accuse me outright, but she warned me, told me I was embarrassing the family, told me men like you destroy women like me." His mouth tightened. "She's wrong." Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Barnett has been watching us. I saw him today. The way he looked at me, it wasn't curiosity." That made Caleb's blood run cold. Barnett didn't trade in curiosity. He traded in leverage. "You need to stay away from me, starting now." Eleanor shook her head. "I won't." Before he could respond, slow applause echoed from the shadows. "Well," Barnett said, stepping into the lantern light, "this is enlightening." Eleanor's breath caught. Caleb moved instinctively, placing himself half a step in front of her. "Evening, overseer," Caleb said evenly. Barnett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing about widows," he said. "People expect grief, not secrets." "This is none of your business," Eleanor said, forcing strength into her voice. Barnett's gaze slid over her slowly. "Everything on this property is my business." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Margaret would be very interested to know how often you visit the yards after dark." Eleanor felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. "What do you want?" she asked. Barnett's smile widened. "It depends. Silence is expensive." Caleb's fists clenched. "Leave her out of this." "Oh, I can't do that," Barnett replied. "She's the most valuable part." Eleanor straightened. "Name your price."
Barnett studied her, enjoying the moment far too much. "I'll keep my mouth shut, for now. But you," he nodded at Caleb, "stay far away from her. No wandering, no whispers, no late-night visits." "And if we don't?" Eleanor asked. Barnett's eyes hardened. "Then I speak, and when I do, the consequences won't be gentle."
He turned and walked away, boots crunching against gravel, leaving silence behind him like a threat. Eleanor's knees nearly gave out. Caleb caught her arm. "You shouldn't have bargained with him." "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "He'll ruin you." Caleb looked down at her hand gripping his sleeve. He already might. They stood there, too close, too exposed, knowing every second mattered. From the house, Margaret's silhouette appeared at an upstairs window, watching. Eleanor pulled her hand away as if burned. "We have to be careful now." Caleb nodded slowly. Careful might not be enough. Because once a secret had a price, someone always came back to collect. Barnett Crane had tasted power, and he wasn't done yet. By dawn, Eleanor would face a choice that could cost her everything, or condemn Caleb forever. The house didn't sleep that night. Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind drag its fingers along the windows. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. Every shadow seemed to move with intention. Barnett's smile replayed in her mind like a curse. Silence, she realized, was no longer safety. It was a weapon. By morning, the estate buzzed with a strange tension. Servants spoke in half-sentences. Workers avoided eye contact. Something had shifted overnight, and Eleanor could feel it pressing against her ribs. She found Caleb near the far fence just after sunrise. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said when he saw her. "I needed air and answers."
Caleb wiped sweat from his brow, eyes scanning the property. Barnett didn't keep quiet. Her stomach dropped. What did he say? "Enough to make people watch me differently," he said. "Not enough to name you. Yet." Eleanor's hands curled into fists. "He's waiting." Caleb nodded. "He wants us scared. He wants control." Before Eleanor could speak, a sharp whistle cut through the morning. Barnett stood near the milling shed, arms crossed, his expression smug. "Rourke," he called, "you're needed." Caleb met Eleanor's eyes. "Go," he murmured. "Whatever happens, don't step in." She didn't want to let him out of her sight, but she forced herself to turn away. Inside the house, Margaret was waiting. "You look tired," she said coldly, "troubled." Eleanor kept her voice steady. "I didn't sleep well." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "Neither did I. Rumors have a way of doing that." Eleanor's breath caught. "Rumors?" "Yes," Margaret replied. "About you, about your interest." Eleanor lifted her chin. "I've done nothing wrong." Margaret leaned closer. "Wrong depends on who's speaking." Meanwhile, in the yard, Barnett circled Caleb like a vulture. "You know," Barnett said casually, "there are men who'd pay good money for information about a widow's weaknesses." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You already have what you want." Barnett laughed. "For now." His eyes darkened. "But silence needs maintenance." By evening, Eleanor heard it herself, whispers trailing behind her as she walked the halls, eyes following her movements, doors closing just a little too quickly. She met Caleb again at dusk near the orchard. "They're turning us into a story," she whispered. "That's how it starts. Stories end badly around here." Eleanor stepped closer, ignoring the danger. "I won't let him own us." Caleb's voice softened. "Then you need to be ready for what that costs."
Before she could answer, Barnett's voice rang out from the path. "Widow Hale," he said loudly. "Margaret would like a word." This time, his grin was triumphant. Eleanor turned to Caleb, fear flickering in her eyes. "He's forcing it." Caleb's hand brushed hers, quick and secret. "Whatever happens," he said, "remember this wasn't a mistake." She nodded,
then walked toward the house, spine straight, heart pounding, because Barnett Crane wasn't just spreading rumors anymore. He was setting the stage. Barnett had sharpened his leverage, and Margaret was listening. By nightfall, Eleanor would be confronted with a demand that could shatter every rule she'd ever lived by. The drawing room felt colder than the night outside. Eleanor stood near the fireplace, hands clasped tightly in front of her, while Margaret Hale sat across the room with rigid posture and sharp eyes. Barnett lingered near the doorway, pretending to be invisible, while clearly enjoying every second. Margaret was the first to speak. "Tell me the truth," she said, calmly, too calmly. "Do you have feelings for that man?" The question landed like a blow to the chest. Eleanor's mouth went dry. She'd prepared herself for accusations, for warnings, even for threats, but not this, not said so plainly, not with Barnett listening. "I don't see how that's relevant," Eleanor replied carefully. Margaret leaned forward. "It's relevant because this house is hanging by a thread, and you're pulling on it." Barnett cleared his throat. "People are talking, loudly." Eleanor turned toward him, anger flashing through her fear. "People talk because you encourage them." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Enough. Eleanor, answer me." The silence stretched, heavy, dangerous. "Yes," Eleanor said finally, "I do." Barnett's lips curled into a satisfied smile. Margaret inhaled slowly, as if steadying herself. "Then you are more reckless than I feared." Eleanor stepped forward. "I've lived my entire life obeying rules that never protected me. I will not be shamed for feeling something real." Margaret stood abruptly. "That man is not real to this world. He is property, and your attachment to him will destroy you both." Outside, Caleb felt it before he heard it. The tension in the house bled into the yard, sharp and unmistakable. Workers paused. Conversation stopped. He looked up just in time to see Barnett exit the house, his expression smug. Caleb's gut twisted. Minutes later, Eleanor emerged onto the front steps, face pale but composed. Their eyes met across the yard. One look told him everything. Margaret had decided. That night, Caleb found Eleanor near the storage shed, where lantern light barely reached. "They're sending you away," she whispered, "at dawn." Caleb closed his eyes. "I knew it." "You don't understand," she said urgently. "Margaret is arranging a transfer, somewhere far, somewhere I can't reach you." Caleb stepped closer. "Then you need to let me go." Eleanor shook her head, tears welling. "I can't." He took her hands, gripping them tightly. "Listen to me. If you fight this openly, they'll ruin you. If you try to stop it, they'll punish me." Her voice broke. "I won't stand by and lose you." "You might have to," he said softly. Voices echoed nearby. They separated just as Barnett's silhouette appeared again, watching. "Touching farewell," he said. "Enjoy it while you can." Eleanor's fear hardened into something fierce. That night, she didn't return to her room. Instead, she packed a small bag, papers, money, things she'd never planned to touch again, because if Caleb was leaving at dawn, she would not be staying behind. The decision had been made, but not by Margaret alone. Before sunrise, Eleanor would choose between her name and her freedom, and once she chose, there would be no turning back. The house was quiet in the hours before dawn. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that felt like it was holding its breath. Eleanor moved through the corridors without a lamp, guided by memory and resolve. The floorboards creaked softly beneath her steps, each sound sending a jolt through her nerves.
She wore a plain, dark cloak now, her mourning black replaced with something practical, invisible. In her hand was a small leather pouch. Inside it, money, papers, and one key she had never planned to use, the key to the storage shed. Caleb sat on a crate inside, wrists loose, but watched, the door locked more for symbolism than necessity. Barnett hadn't tied Caleb. He wanted Caleb alert, afraid, waiting. The lock clicked. Caleb looked up sharply as the door opened. Lantern light spilled in, and then he saw her. "Eleanor?" His voice dropped. "What are you doing?" She closed the door behind her. "What I should have done days ago." "You shouldn't be here," he said urgently. "If they catch you, they already decided your fate. I'm not letting them decide mine, too." She crossed the small space and pressed the key into his palm. "We leave, now." Caleb stared at it, stunned. "That's madness." "Maybe," she said, "but staying is worse." He stood slowly. "If you run with me, there's no returning to this life." Eleanor met his eyes without hesitation. "I know." Outside, the first hint of light touched the horizon. Time was bleeding away. They slipped out through the back orchard, keeping to the shadows. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Eleanor's heart pounded so hard she feared it might give them away. Halfway to the tree line, a voice cut through the dark. "Going somewhere?"
Barnett stepped into view, lantern raised, smile sharp as a blade. "I figured you'd try something," he said calmly. "You always do." Caleb moved in front of Eleanor. "Let her go." Barnett laughed. "Still pretending you have power?" Lanterns flared behind him. Margaret's silhouette appeared on the porch, rigid and furious. Eleanor stepped forward. "This ends now." Margaret's voice was ice. "You will ruin yourself." Eleanor lifted her chin. "Then let me." Barnett lunged. Caleb reacted on instinct, shoving him back. Barnett stumbled, crashing into a fence post. Shouts erupted. Footsteps thundered. "There!" Margaret screamed. "Seize him!" Caleb grabbed Eleanor's hand. "Run!" They bolted toward the trees as voices exploded behind them. Lantern light chased them through the darkness. Eleanor's lungs burned. Her skirts caught on roots, but Caleb pulled her free, never letting go. They reached the river just as shouts closed in. "We cross," Caleb said. "They won't follow." The water was icy, fast-moving. Eleanor gasped as it soaked her clothes, but she didn't stop. Caleb held her steady, guiding her through the current, muscles straining. They climbed the opposite bank, soaked, shaking, breathless. Behind them, the shouting faded. For the first time, silence returned, but this time it felt earned. Eleanor collapsed into Caleb's arms, laughing and crying at once. "I chose," she whispered. Caleb held her tightly. "So did I." Ahead of them, the forest stretched wide and unknown, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor stepped into it without permission. They had escaped the house, but not the consequences, because by morning, Margaret would hunt them down, and the world beyond the forest would demand a price for their freedom. The forest swallowed them whole. Tall trees closed in from every side, branches tangled like warning signs, the ground slick beneath their feet. Eleanor had never been this far from the estate without a carriage, without a name to announce her arrival. Every step felt unreal, like she was walking out of a life she'd only pretended to own. They didn't stop until the sun was fully up. Caleb slowed first, scanning the woods before finally letting out a breath. Eleanor leaned against a tree, chest heaving, clothes still damp from the river. Her hands shook, not from the cold, but from the realization that there was no going back. "You okay?" Caleb asked quietly. She nodded. "I think so."
He studied her carefully, as if searching for regret. He didn't find it. "You understand what this means," he said. "Out here, you're not a widow with protection. You're just a woman." Eleanor met his gaze. "That's exactly what I wanted." They moved again once the light grew stronger, following an old trade path Caleb recognized. The forest thinned by midday, opening into rolling land dotted with abandoned fencing and long-forgotten fields. Freedom, Eleanor realized, wasn't clean. It was hard. It was exhausting. It smelled like dirt and sweat and uncertainty. By afternoon, they reached a small riverside settlement, barely more than a cluster of buildings and smoke curling from chimneys. Eleanor hesitated at the edge of the trees. "People will ask questions," she said. "They always do," Caleb replied. "We keep moving." They passed through quickly, heads down. Eleanor felt eyes on her, curiosity sharpening into suspicion. Her clothes, her accent, the way she carried herself, it all marked her as someone out of place. As they left the settlement behind, Caleb slowed. "They'll follow," he said. "Margaret?" Eleanor asked. "And Barnett. Men like him don't forgive lost leverage." By nightfall, they found shelter in an abandoned hunting cabin. The roof leaked, the door barely held, but it was dry enough. Caleb started a small fire, while Eleanor wrapped herself in her cloak, watching the flames dance. "This is my fault," she said suddenly. Caleb looked up. "No. You gave me a choice. No one ever did that before." Silence settled between them, not heavy, but thoughtful. Eleanor stared into the fire. "What happens now?" Caleb sat beside her. "Now we survive. We find work. We keep our heads down." "And if they find us?" His jaw tightened. "Then we run again." The fire crackled. Outside, the forest whispered. Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder, tentative at first, then certain. He didn't pull away. For the first time since her husband died, sleep came easily. But miles behind them, lanterns moved through the woods. Margaret Hale did not forgive disobedience, and Barnett Crane did not forgive loss. Freedom gave them a head start, but not safety, because the men hunting them weren't done yet, and the next choice Eleanor made would decide whether they lived free or were dragged back in chains. The cabin didn't feel safe by morning. Eleanor woke before dawn, heart racing, the quiet too sharp to ignore. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cold crept in like a warning. Caleb was already awake, standing near the door, listening. "They're close," he murmured. Eleanor sat up. "How do you know?" "I've been hunted before," he said. "The woods change when someone's following." They moved fast, leaving no fire, no tracks they didn't have to. The path led them toward higher ground, where the trees thinned and the wind carried sound farther than comfort allowed. By mid-morning, they heard it, a distant shout.
Eleanor's stomach dropped. "That's them." Caleb's eyes hardened. Barnett. They pushed on, legs burning, breath shallow. Eleanor stumbled once, then again, exhaustion finally demanding payment. Caleb caught her, steadying her. "You can't slow down now," he said gently. "Just a little farther." They reached a narrow ravine just as voices grew louder behind them. Caleb scanned the drop, then the ridge. "This way," he said. "Careful." They slid down the slope, clinging to roots, dirt scraping skin. Eleanor's cloak tore, but she didn't stop. At the bottom, they ducked beneath overhanging rock and waited, barely breathing. Boots crunched above. Barnett's voice drifted down, smug and sharp. "She won't last out here," he said. "She'll break. They always do." Another man laughed. Eleanor clenched her fists, anger burning hotter than fear. Caleb leaned close, whispering, "Stay still." Minutes stretched. Finally, the boots moved on. They waited longer than felt necessary before emerging, bodies shaking, not just from cold, but from the nearness of being caught. By late afternoon, they reached a larger road. Wagons passed, traders shouted, life moved forward, indifferent to their danger. "This is risky," Eleanor said. "It's cover," Caleb replied. "Crowds hide better than forests." They blended in, keeping their heads down. Eleanor traded a ring for food and supplies, watching part of her old life disappear into a stranger's pocket without regret. As dusk settled, they found a boarding house on the edge of town. The keeper eyed them but took their coin. That night, Eleanor lay awake, listening to the sounds of other lives through thin walls. "They won't stop," she whispered. Caleb stared at the ceiling. "Neither will we." But somewhere outside town, Barnett stood at the road's edge, staring at the tracks leading forward.
He smiled slowly, because the hunt was far from over. They'd escaped again, but each step forward tightened the net. And soon, Eleanor would learn the truth. Running wasn't enough when someone wanted to own your ending. The boarding house smelled like boiled coffee and old wood. Eleanor woke to the sound of voices downstairs, laughing, arguing, living. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality settled back in. The thin mattress, the unfamiliar ceiling, the man sleeping lightly beside the door, positioned there out of instinct, not comfort. Caleb opened his eyes the second she moved. "Morning," he said quietly. She nodded. "We made it through the night." "That doesn't mean we're safe," he replied. They didn't linger. By sunrise, they were back on the road, blending into the steady flow of people heading west. Eleanor kept her head down, her posture deliberately smaller. She listened more than she spoke, learning the rhythm of survival. By midday, they reached a growing town, rough around the edges, loud, hungry for labor. The kind of place where names didn't matter much as long as you worked hard and didn't ask questions. Caleb stopped near a notice board covered in scraps of paper. "This is where we pause." "Pause?" Eleanor asked. "We can't keep running without becoming suspicious," he said. "We need a story." "A lie," she corrected. He met her eyes. "A good one." They agreed quickly. Husband and wife, traveling west after a loss. Simple, familiar, believable. It tasted strange on Eleanor's tongue the first time she said it. "My husband and I are looking for work." The words felt borrowed, but necessary. They found it by afternoon. A lumber operation outside town needed hands. The owner barely looked at Eleanor twice, more interested in Caleb's strength and quiet focus. "You vouch for him?" the man asked Eleanor. She nodded. "With my life." Caleb glanced at her, something unspoken passing between them. They were given a small cabin near the edge of the property, crude, unfinished, but theirs for now. Eleanor sat on the rough bed, exhaustion finally catching up. "This is strange," she said softly. "Pretending." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "Pretending keeps you breathing." She looked up at him. "And what happens when pretending feels too real?" He didn't answer right away. That night they shared the narrow bed for warmth, not as something forbidden, but as something chosen. Eleanor lay awake, aware of every breath, every shift of his body. "This lie," she whispered, "it won't protect us forever." "No," Caleb agreed, "but it buys time." Outside the cabin, a horse slowed. A figure dismounted in the shadows. Barnett Crane studied the lights of the lumber camp, his expression patient, pleased. "Found you," he murmured. The lie had given them shelter, but it had also given Barnett a place to strike. And the next time he stepped into Eleanor's life, he wouldn't come alone. Eleanor sensed it before she saw him.
That familiar tightening in her chest, the instinct that told her something old and dangerous had crossed into her new life. She was hanging laundry behind the cabin when the sound of boots on gravel made her freeze. Slow, confident, unhurried. She turned. Barnett Crane stood near the fence line, hat low over his eyes, a smile resting on his face like he'd never left her world at all. "Well," he said, "you clean up nice for someone who ran." Eleanor's hands clenched around the sheet. "You shouldn't be here." Barnett chuckled. "And yet, here I am." Caleb emerged from the cabin instantly, body tensing the moment he saw him. "You need to leave."
Barnett raised his palms mockingly. "Easy, I'm just passing through." That was a lie. They all knew it. "I spoke to a few folks in town," Barnett continued, eyes flicking to Eleanor. "Nice story you're telling. Husband and wife, tragic past. Very convincing." Eleanor swallowed. "What do you want?" Barnett stepped closer. "What I always wanted. Control." Caleb moved in front of her. "You won't get it." Barnett leaned in, voice dropping. "You think the law would side with you? A runaway slave and a widow playing house?" Eleanor felt the ground tilt. "You wouldn't dare." Barnett smiled wider. "Try me." That night, the camp buzzed with rumors. A man asking questions, offering coin for information. Eleanor watched lanterns flicker outside their cabin, fear crawling up her spine. Caleb packed quietly. "We may need to move again." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Running is what he expects." Caleb looked at her. "Then what do you suggest?" Eleanor straightened. "We stop letting him decide." The next morning, Barnett returned with 2 local deputies. Caleb's hand tightened around Eleanor's. The deputies looked uncertain, uncomfortable. "This man," Barnett said loudly, "is stolen property." Eleanor stepped forward before Caleb could speak. "He is my husband." Barnett laughed. "Then you're lying." Eleanor met his gaze. "Then prove it." The deputies hesitated. Papers were demanded, names questioned. Barnett's certainty faltered when no clear record surfaced. The town didn't care about old plantation disputes. They cared about peace. Barnett's smile cracked.
"This isn't over," he hissed as the deputies moved on. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled once he was gone. Caleb caught her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," she said softly, "I did." Because for the first time, she hadn't hidden. She had stood her ground. Barnett had lost this round, but men like him never quit, and the next move would force Eleanor and Caleb to decide how far they were willing to go to protect their freedom. Barnett Crane did not leave town. Eleanor noticed the signs first, the way conversation stopped when she entered the general store, the way a stranger lingered too long near the lumberyard gates. Fear had a smell to it, metallic and sharp, and it was back in the air. "He's waiting," Caleb said that night, "for us to slip." Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. "Or for me to break." They both knew the truth. Barnett didn't need proof anymore. He needed pressure, and pressure worked best when applied slowly. 2 days later, the pressure came. The lumber owner pulled Caleb aside before dawn. "You're strong," he said, "but trouble follows you. I can't afford that." Caleb nodded once. No argument. He'd learned long ago when fighting back only made things worse. By evening, their future had shrunk again. Eleanor felt it like a physical wound. "He's poisoning everything we touch." Caleb met her gaze. "Then we poison his hold on us." They walked the edge of town after dark, speaking in low voices. "If we leave now," Eleanor said, "he'll keep following." "And if we stay," Caleb replied,
he'll tighten the noose. Eleanor stopped walking. Then we do something he doesn't expect. Caleb studied her carefully. What are you thinking? She inhaled, steadying herself. We confront him publicly. Caleb stiffened. That's dangerous. So is living afraid.
They found Barnett at the tavern, drinking slowly, watching the room like he owned it. Eleanor felt her pulse hammer as she stepped inside, but she didn't hesitate. Barnett smiled when he saw her. Come to bargain? No, she said clearly, to end this. The room quieted. Eleanor spoke louder, forcing witnesses into existence. You've followed us, threatened us, lied about us. Barnett stood, eyes cold, careful. You want control, she continued, but you have none. Not here, not anymore. Barnett laughed, but it sounded thin. You think words protect you? No, she said. Truth does. She laid out everything, his threats, his leverage, his obsession. Faces in the tavern shifted. No one liked a bully, especially one who brought trouble to their town. Barnett's confidence cracked. Caleb stood beside her, silent but solid. Leave, Eleanor finished, or the next people you answer to won't be as patient. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Barnett grabbed his coat and stormed out, pride bleeding from every step. Eleanor exhaled shakily. We just made an enemy. Caleb took her hand. We already had one. They left town before sunrise, not running, but choosing. They had faced him and survived, but scars remain even after victory, and the final chapter would ask one last question. What does freedom truly cost? They didn't stop until the road turned to dust and the dust turned to grass. Days passed, then weeks. Eleanor and Caleb followed the land westward, not chasing escape anymore, but something quieter, belonging. They learned the rhythm of each other in ways no house or lie ever allowed. Mornings came with shared silence.
Nights with stories told under open sky, where no walls listened and no names carried weight. Freedom, Eleanor learned, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with triumph or certainty. It arrived slowly, in moments that felt almost ordinary. A shared loaf of bread, a fire that didn't need hiding, laughter that didn't flinch afterward. They found work where questions were few and effort mattered more than history. A small valley town welcomed hands that worked hard and kept peace. Caleb labored with timber and stone. Eleanor helped at a schoolhouse, teaching children who didn't care where she came from, only that she stayed. At night, they shared a modest home near the tree line. No locks, no secrets. One evening, as the sun burned low and gold across the hills, Eleanor stood outside watching the wind bend the tall grass. Caleb came up behind her, resting his chin near her shoulder. "You ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The house, the name?" She thought about it. About silk dresses and rules, about silence that suffocated, about a life where safety had never meant peace. "No," she said honestly. "I miss who I thought I was allowed to be, but I like who I am now better." Caleb smiled. "So do I." Later that night they sat by the fire, hands entwined. Eleanor traced the scars along his knuckles, not with sadness, but gratitude. Each mark was proof he had survived. Each breath he took beside her was proof she had chosen right. "Do you ever worry they'll find us?" she asked. Caleb shook his head. "No." "Why?" "Because we're not hiding anymore," he said. "We're just living." Eleanor leaned into him, finally understanding what that meant. Freedom wasn't the absence of fear. It was the refusal to let fear decide. Far behind them, the past faded, not erased, but powerless. Barnett became a name no one spoke. Margaret became a memory that no longer stung.
The world moved on, as it always did. But here, in this quiet place, something remained. Two people who had been told they were wrong, dangerous, impossible, and yet, together, they had built something real. Not a rebellion, not a scandal, a life. As the fire burned low, Eleanor rested her head on Caleb's chest, listening to a heartbeat that no longer raced, only endured. And for the first time, she knew the truth. She had not lost everything that night she raised her hand at the auction. She had found it. If this story moved you, haunted you, or stayed with you, welcome to Canon of Darkness. Subscribe, like, comment, and share, and tell us where you're watching from in the USA. Because some stories don't end in the dark, they rise from it.